Hi, I'm Tom Bradford. This video is about the entrepreneur route for Ireland, and we're going to go through the key points you should bear in mind if you're considering this route and what to avoid. So in terms of the diagrams I've prepared, I'm going to show you here the startup route, what the eligibility criteria are, what you've got to think about for you and your family, and really what a huge opportunity this presents. I'm going to deal with residence requirements and various other matters, and deal with a concrete case study here. We've got the key point is this is an investment of only £50,000. It ultimately gets you Irish citizenship and therefore EU citizenship after 5 years. It's primarily a residence program rather than citizenship by investment program, but nevertheless it's a great opportunity, particularly in comparison with the UK. It looks very favourable in light of Brexit. Ireland is a committed member of Europe and the EU, so this is an option that really bears real consideration. Before we start with the detail, I'm a lawyer and partner at the law firm Freeths. In this series on YouTube, I cover the various ways in which you can access other jurisdictions for business and investment, and make sure you've got all the information you need about investor visas and business visas and entrepreneur visas, so you can compare the options and make an informed decision on how to proceed. With my Reach Abroad service at my firm, I help entrepreneurs and investors and business people set up businesses in different jurisdictions and bring in people internationally to help build up their businesses. So if that's of interest, please subscribe and click the notification bell to get my updates when I release them. Let's start with the overview of the various investor and entrepreneur routes available for Ireland. So you can see here, and I'll just zoom in, the 50k startup entrepreneur route for Ireland. This is at a great level, I think, just in terms of capturing those startups, and perhaps not just startups. It may be that people applying onto this route have significantly more funds available, but I just think it's a great idea. Obviously, they do their due diligence on you if you apply, but it represents a great opportunity both for Ireland and for entrepreneurs to secure residence in a great country that's closely associated with the EU, that is a committed member of the EU. That's the £50,000 route. I mean, if you compare that, for example, with the UK and the entrepreneur route in the UK, that's £200,000. There is a graduate entrepreneur route that's comparable with at £50,000, and there is a £50,000 route as well in the UK. It's different though. You need to raise funding from specified venture capital, seed funding competitions, or government grants. This is a very different idea. The £50,000 can be your own money, or it could be gifted from a member of your family, for example. So it's a much broader opportunity. There are some other investor visa options which basically involve more of a passive route to permanent residency and Irish citizenship. I've got other videos coming up on these, so if these are of interest, by all means subscribe. The endowment route, just very briefly, the endowment route at £500,000, that involves a donation. That's entirely passive. It will be relatively rare though. Enterprise investment, I think, is probably of more interest to you. That involves investing £1 million either in an existing business in Ireland, it doesn't have to be your own, or in your own business. So maybe you have substantially more capital available than under the 50k route, and you could apply under this route. Then there's an approved investment fund path. That's also interesting. It's also passive, and there's some very compelling low risk, not zero risk, of course, low risk investment options in Ireland. I'm currently working with one of the funds which has a very compelling proposition and 100% success rate. That's good if you don't necessarily want to be actively involved in a business. It's a passive investment. So as I say, I'm going to have videos on that coming up. The next route is a real estate investment fund, a similar idea that involves £2 million. So what we'll do is move on from the overview to the question, what are the eligibility criteria? What are the requirements for the entrepreneur startup visa in Ireland? Let's have a look at that. We'll zoom in first. So we'll deal first with the type of business. What type of business do you need in order to make a success of your application? Well, your business idea has to be of the right kind. And you see this with entrepreneur routes in every jurisdiction, or in many jurisdictions, that the business idea must be a viable one. Now, there's always that balance to be struck insofar as the immigration officials looking at your application are unlikely themselves to be entrepreneurs or to really be familiar with what it is to be an entrepreneur. And that represents a problem. First of all, there's a sort of misunderstanding by immigration officials in different jurisdictions around experience. Most or many entrepreneurs are not going to have experience. This may be their first, second, or third venture. They won't have extensive experience, and they'll be young. Ireland's a very young country in terms of its population balance, and one of the purposes of this route is to encourage innovation and young people. So I hope that this doesn't become a barrier under this route, but many applications are turned down in different jurisdictions under equivalent routes on the basis that someone doesn't have enough experience. And that really just misunderstands the nature of what it is to be an entrepreneur and a young entrepreneur engaged in innovation. But your business idea needs to be of the right kind. It needs to be viable. It can't be a business in retail. It can't be a business to do with personal services. Let's just zoom in on this. And it can't be a business to do with catering. What they are focusing on is what they call a high potential startup. This means what you're offering is new and innovative, and it's pitched at international markets. So they're looking at apps in the fintech space, let's say. That's the example that I've chosen for you, and we'll go through the case study in a moment. They're looking for people in tech, but not in retail, personal services, or catering, in traditional industries where there's perhaps a low turnover or profitability is difficult to demonstrate. I think there's probably some recognition that there is a high failure rate, but the test applied generally is one of viability, whether your business is viable rather than immediate success. So it's got to be a high potential startup. Let's run through the other criteria. So the next point is it's got to be capable of creating 10 jobs in Ireland. That is quite an ask. I mean, in the UK, for example, there's a requirement that you create 2 full-time jobs for the equivalent category, the entrepreneur visa. They've got to be created for a minimum term of 12 months before you apply for an extension. That's at the 3-year point in the UK. But those jobs must be created. All that needs to be shown here, by contrast, is the potential to create 10 jobs. It's not mandatory, unlike with the UK, that you actually create them. But it's got to have the potential. So that's the idea behind this requirement. The next requirement is that it's capable. Again, the language is one of capability, viability. It's capable of achieving 1 million sales within 3 to 4 years of starting up. Whether it does or not is another thing, but it must be capable of achieving that. And that's got to be demonstrated in the business plan. And here, I think, like with all other entrepreneur routes for different jurisdictions, the business plan is going to be central to your success or failure in applying. What I see in business plans is a lot of businesses that simply aren't viable, or they're viable in theory, but they're not supported by the correct market research. So what I have is specialist business plan writers who will put your case, if you like, at its highest, will draw out the potential, draw out the strings in terms of your business idea, and then get it into a concrete form and do some market testing and make sure that the market research backs up your proposal and assertions about the viability of the business. So that's that requirement. The next requirement is one of novelty, if you like, or it's got to be a young business. It's got to be less than 6 years old, your business. And here, and this kind of goes back to the point I was making about experience, there's got to be an experienced management team. Now that experience could be evidenced in different ways. It's not necessarily your experience as applicant, although it's highly likely that you'll be part of the management team. But you've got to show that you can draw on expertise. So I have clients who aren't necessarily themselves experienced managers because they're on the younger side, but they have mentors who are involved in the business, perhaps with an equity stake, or non-executive directors who are more experienced and who are able to offer a steer on the direction of the business and implementing it on a practical level. So that's what this criteria is getting at. And even if you don't have a lot of experience, if you're worried about this criteria, it must be an experienced management team. Speak to me, because there's ways of structuring that to ensure that you do have the requisite level of experience on board. This isn't just for the sake of the application, this is for the sake of your business and testing it, seeing whether this will fly, whether the business is actually going to get off the ground. You need to be able to persuade the immigration authorities of that, and you need to persuade yourself of it if you're moving to another jurisdiction, to throw everything into this. So that's that last key criteria. There are other criteria, but I'm going to deal with them in more detail in a separate video. I thought it would be helpful to just give you the overview here. Now, in terms of the path to residency and citizenship, you apply as main applicant. Let's just zoom in here. So you're applying as the main applicant. You can bring your wife and she will apply at the same time. Your children between 18 and 24, and your children under 18. So you all apply together if that's your wish, and if the application is granted, you're granted a permit for 2 years. It takes you to the 2-year point. If you then apply again and you can show that the business is still viable, then it's extended for 3 years. So that total 5-year period puts you in a position in which you can then apply for permanent residence, effectively, for a permit which gives you indefinite leave, but which is renewable every 5 years. And that also puts you in a position in which you can apply for Irish citizenship. So that's the path, that's the trajectory. In relation to absences and how long you have to actually be in Ireland, in relation to the other routes I showed you at the beginning of this video, there's only really a requirement that you be in Ireland for 1 day per year, which is quite extraordinary really. But those are basically passive routes. You're not expected to be in Ireland unless you are applying for a passport at the end of the process. Now, in that case, you need to be in Ireland for more than half of the year. So you can see here, I've put 180 days plus, actually more than 180 days. You've got to be in Ireland. But there's still significant flexibility there. And there's a recognition that in relation to your startup and your enterprise that there will be interests abroad as well. You have to engage in international travel. And you may need to be out of the country. And that's not problematic in principle. But if you are planning to apply for citizenship at the end of the process, you'll want to make sure you're in the country for more than half of the year and for 12 months in the 5th year. Continuous residence. One of the interesting features of the Irish citizenship path is there's currently no English language requirement for applying for Irish citizenship, unlike with the UK, for example. So that's a big benefit for some. I think it's not as relevant for this route. If you're applying to commence a startup in Ireland, you'll be expected to have sufficient knowledge of English, and you'd probably be knocked out at the initial eligibility stage if that was not the case. So let's deal with a case study. I'm going to use the example of Kabir. He is a citizen of India. He'd like to secure Irish residency and is interested in Irish citizenship by investment. And that goes for him, his wife, and his 6-year-old daughter. Now, his business idea is a fintech app. Again, I mentioned that earlier. He wants to develop this for Apple and Android phones. He has £50,000 of his own funds to invest in the business. So let's go through the stages. He completes the application form for the Ireland Entrepreneur Visa, and he completes the business plan with the help of me and my local Irish lawyer. he pays the application fee of £350 or €350. We send it to the evaluation committee for review. The application succeeds and the evaluation committee informs the Minister of Justice and Equality that the proposal is acceptable under the programme, and he and his family are then invited to apply for residency permission under the programme. Now, if you think about it, this is one of the great features of this path and this visa. You don't have to invest until your application has been approved. Now, that's different from some of the, say, US paths where you have to invest first and you then apply, and your application may then be refused. So the difference here is that you make an application, an initial application if you like, and you show that the funds are available, and it's then approved, and only once it's approved do you then go on to invest. So that's quite important and not something to take for granted if you're considering other options in different jurisdictions such as the US. So it having been approved, he invests, he transfers the €50,000 to an Irish bank. It must be a financial institution regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. He then submits an affidavit, and this just confirms that he and his wife have no criminal convictions and are of good character. He and his wife are then granted the initial application, and they get residency permission for Ireland. This lasts for 2 years, and in those 2 years he commences his startup in Ireland and continues in business. In other words, he doesn't go insolvent. Now he then applies at the 2-year point for a renewal of his Irish residency permission. So this triggers another examination of the viability and success of the business by the evaluation committee, and his application is successful. The business is viable. It continues to be viable and promising. So his Irish residency permission is granted for a further 3 years. At the 5th year, he and his family apply for a permanent residence, so for a permit which is renewable every 5 years. And as long as they don't commit any criminal offences, for example, of a qualifying kind, then they will be able to stay residents of Ireland indefinitely. He can also apply, he and his family that is, for a passport. And here's where we come to the real benefit of this route. Through acquiring Irish citizenship, they become nationals and citizens of the European Union. Ireland is still a committed member of Europe and member of the European Union, unlike the UK, which is exiting. And this gives significant benefits in the form of free movement around the EU. But even in light of Brexit, because of the common travel area, with their Irish passports, they can also travel freely between Ireland and the UK. So that means that he and his family can access the UK as well as the EU in an unfettered way. So those are the key points. I hope that was helpful. As I say, this channel is all about helping you reach abroad. And as I say, with my Reach Abroad Island service, I help entrepreneurs and investors set up businesses and invest in Ireland and get the right visa and support to access Ireland to achieve their business, investment and citizenship goals. This video is part of a series on the Irish investor and entrepreneur visas. Don't hesitate to subscribe and make sure you click the notification bell to get notified when I release the videos on this subject. Thanks for your time, and I hope to hear from you soon.